Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also donate to support this work. If you find this valuable, please like and share and send Cutting Through to your friends and contacts. Um, as we all know, I think at this point, international law has been under siege for a very long time by a variety of players. It's not a particularly useful, or at least not always a useful tool for powerful countries. It might serve to restrain them. That's usually the function of good law anyway. Um, but in the last few years, this has really gotten a lot worse. And I would submit in the last couple of years, international law has lost legitimacy for many people around the world, and it's become something that's nothing more than a rhetorical device that we use to say, to try and use some framework to say something is bad and objectionable. We call it illegal, but I think a lot of people have, with good reason, lost any faith that an international legal system will ever really be something that imposes real law around the world. Um, this is the result largely of the actions of the United States. And, one of the things that I think has made this so obvious to so many people is the reactions and the way the United States has behaved regarding Ukraine on the one hand and Gaza on the other, where, when it was something the United States didn't like and done by a rival power in the world that the United States sees as, at the very least, a competitor and in many ways an enemy, that being Russia, then it was all for issuing arrest warrants, particularly for Vladimir Putin. But in Gaza, where the war crimes have been so blatant, and the number of dead civilians, comparatively speaking, when we think about the scale of the countries and territories involved in Russia, Ukraine on the one hand, and Israel, Gaza on the other, the scale of civilian destruction, death, and suffering is just so much bigger in Gaza. There, the United States not only refuses to support any action, it in fact opposes it and even has sanctioned members of the court. This wasn't just Donald Trump. This was under the Biden administration as well. People look at that and they say, well, how can that be a legal system? How can there be laws that function in such a way? And of course, there can't. There can't be laws that function in such a way. And it's not just a shame that it isn't working. It's not just a shame that we've seen international law work in the past in ways that could have mattered if they were really applied, if the law was really applied universally. Slobodan Milosevic was one example, of course. It isn't only that, it's that without some international system of right and wrong, of what is acceptable and what is not, that binds the powerful and the less powerful alike, well, we see what happens. We see what happens. We can look at Ukraine. We can look at Gaza. We can also look at Sudan. We can look at Democratic Republic of Congo. We can look at what the United States itself is doing on its southern border. Many, many examples. And they go unchecked. There's no place to appeal other than the governments of the countries involved. And I think we can pretty well assume that the governments of the countries involved are not going to suddenly change their behavior because some portion of their population doesn't agree with it. I mean, if they did, there would be another portion of the population that didn't agree with that. And we can talk about who's the majority and who's not, but that's just not the issue. The issue is that there should be some sort of rules-based order, and there isn't one. The need for that, I think, has never been clearer. And I think some of us, certainly I, have hoped that there would be some sort of international structure that we could look at and say, well, we can maybe not support what it is now, but we can work with that to create something different. And I think some people, I never held out any hope that the BRICS alliance would be such a such a an organization, if you will. But some people did, and I think if we look at their recent summit and the statement that came out of that, we see what the problem is. And I think we see it very clearly, and why BRICS is not, and BRICS is not the place to look for a more just and reasonable and human rights oriented global order, and how we need, I think, collectively, globally, to come together to really promote a more viable alternative, because I do think the BRICS alliance is going to, in the next, I don't know, quarter century, half century, it will surpass the West in power, economic power, for sure. Maybe not military power, maybe yes, military power, but certainly economic power it won't even take that long. It's already well on its way. And I think there will be an economic shift in terms of systems, so that the United States does not have a veto over all financial transactions in the world as it does now, that it cannot unilaterally, the United States and other Western countries will not be able to simply decide when economic tools and pressures can be applied and when they can't. I think that will change in the coming couple of decades. But will it necessarily change for the better? Just because it's not the Europeans, just because it's not the Americans, doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be better. So who are the BRICS, first of all? So BRICS, the original 5 members, which is why it's called BRICS, were Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS, BRICS. Since then, Indonesia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates have also joined the alliance. And there's 10 partner nations who may soon become full members. That's Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Uganda, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. So when we think about those 20 countries, much like when we think about the West and its allies, because when we think about the West and its allies, we're not just talking about Europe. We're not just talking about France, Britain, the United States. We're also talking about Hungary. We're also talking about Israel. We're also talking about Saudi Arabia. And like the 20 countries that are either members or partners in the BRICS, there's a variety of countries. Some are democracies of various levels. Many are authoritarian states. And many of the and some of them are real powerhouse authoritarian states that I think we need to be as concerned about as we are about the United States. And the problem when these states come together is that they can make declarations that sound good, but they're always politically motivated, not morally motivated. So what came out of the BRICS in their last summit, in their declaration, so for example, they described the recent Israeli and American attacks on Iran as a quote unquote violation of international law, and expressed a grave concern about the deteriorating security situation in the Middle East. Okay, I mean, I think that's a good statement. It's certainly better than anything we could get from the G7 or any other alliance, an alignment of Western countries. So it's one would say that's good. I mean, they went further. They denounced the use of starvation as a weapon of war. They rejected the politicization and militarization of humanitarian aid. All of this, of course, referring to Israeli and American actions in Gaza. Um, they supported UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency. That is the agency that provides support for Palestinian refugees. Sorry, folks, a bit of a cold. Uh, anyway, they also talked about that Gaza and the West Bank are both integral parts of a future Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. In a sense, you could say that's sort of behind the times. I think a lot of people are debating whether that should really be the political orientation. I know I question whether it's wise for that to be the political orientation of any group that is trying to support the Palestinians. Um, I tend to prefer staying away from the question of one state or two states and just go with the idea of Palestinian rights and allow the Palestinians to determine how those rights should be realized, and therefore what they will advocate for. But it's certainly better again than what the United States is saying, which is that they're not even interested in a two-state solution anymore at all. They're really not interested in any solution that involves Palestinian rights. So certainly with all this, the BRICS are way ahead of certainly the United States, if not Europe. Um, they but it wasn't only the Middle East that they had some good things to say. They strongly condemned the imposition of unilateral coercive measures, in other words, sanctions. And they said that unilateral sanctions violate international law and harm human rights, which is true. I mean, it was a clear intention that things like sanctions, international sanctions, would be the purview of the Security Council. The idea being that you would have some global body that was, making these decisions, not one country deciding. Of course, one country can decide who to do business with, but the United States can do a lot more than that, and does do a lot more than that, because they have so much control over the international financial system. So, they obviously, unsurprisingly, voiced concern over Trump's tariffs. I mean, again, you heard the countries that I named. Most of them are trying to, negotiate with Trump so he doesn't impose tariffs on their countries. Certainly, that was where things were at the end of June, which is when the BRICS summit happened, or early July. And so they were going to be careful how they worded it, but they still felt that they had to say something opposing Trump's tariffs. But I think what was important is what was missing, and what was missing was a pretty big thing, and that was, unsurprisingly, um, any mention any real substantive mention of Russia's war in Ukraine. They called for a sustainable peace settlement between Russia and Ukraine, but they did not in any way denounce Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or even object in any way, even indicate that they thought that this was a violation of international law, which it clearly was. They condemned Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure during the spring, talking about civilian casualties, and opposed those actions. That's all they could say, because Russia, being a key member, obviously would not agree to sign on to any statement that didn't say that. So, in a sense, I mean, it's not technically a veto, but it is effectively one, the same. So the same sort of thing that the United States has in its international fora. And we're left with what is once again a political document. Politically, for the BRICS, it was okay to object to the Israeli and American attacks on Iran. It was okay to object to the genocide in Gaza. And great, so they did that, and of course that rallies popular support behind them. But if you're not also condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine and you can include both sides, all of the human rights violations that have occurred in that war, then it's just another political document, and it doesn't really get us anywhere in terms of some sort of fair international system that advocates for both sides. So that is, I think, a crucial thing. We've seen, for example, in both in the Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Israel's genocide in Gaza. What we've seen are advocates for each side, be it Russia, be it Ukraine, be it Israel, be it the Palestinians, um, claim that the other side is genocidal, is committing human rights violations, and of course, in every war, every side does commit human rights violations. And if I shift it for a moment here, just to really focus in on Gaza, the precipitating incident of the genocide, of course, was decades and decades um, of occupation, of dispossession of the Palestinian people, and all that went into that. But the trigger, the what lit the spark, was the October 7th attacks by Hamas and other groups and many individuals as well, out of Gaza into Israel. And again, as I've said many times on this channel and in my writings, we can talk all about the Palestinian right to resist, which they do have. The right to resist doesn't convey oppressed people the right to do anything they want. And there were major war crimes, widespread ones, committed on October 7th, that are clear, that are documented, that are beyond dispute. And again, if you want to make the case that they were somehow justified, well, that's fine, but that needs to be decided in a court of law, because the acts themselves were crimes. And if you want to say that they were then justified, then you need to present that justification and make that argument in a court of law. That's the only way laws work. So, and we don't have a body that's doing that. We have only, when people talk about, well, Hamas committed, these horrible crimes on October 7th, it's the overwhelming majority of the time, it's used to justify what Israel's done since, which it, of course, does not, begin to do. The retribution and revenge, and certainly the utter genocide. I mean, the tens upon tens of thousands of people who have died. We're not just talking about the around 60,000 people who have been directly killed in Israeli attacks, but and even that is almost certainly an undercount. But also, the people who have died from preventable disease, from starvation, from malnutrition, from dehydration, from stress, from we can go on and on and on, from the results of their injuries, from lack of access to good medical care, from lack of access to their medicines that they need. We can go on and on. It's a whole lot of people, and it's unjustified, and there can be no justification for it. But usually when people talk about the crimes that Hamas committed, and other Palestinian groups committed on October 7th, 2023, they're doing it to justify these actions that are unjustifiable. What is necessary is a system that brings all sides to account. To my knowledge, and I've looked at quite a few conflicts over my years of involvement in global politics and history and study of history, all sides in all wars commit heinous acts. Happens all the time. It happens on the level of the individual soldier, and it happens on the command level all the time, without exception. There are no heroes in war. We love to say this stuff. There are no good guys and bad guys. There's just two sides, and the fighting of a war in and of itself is always a bad thing, and it always leads to war crimes. Always, it always happens. It doesn't matter how well you train your soldiers. It doesn't matter what your country's ideology is. It always happens. So we need a system that can judge these things fairly, that does not come at them from the side of either. We can talk about the oppressor and the oppressed. So we know, of course, most of the time, if you look at how these things play out, the side with power is greatly advantaged, but also the powerless side. I wrote a piece months back exploring some of the incidents that we have seen historically, where the less powerful, where the oppressed side has committed crimes that have been appalling, that can't be justified, but can be understood in the context of their oppression. That all has to be part of a legal and political system that we strive for. That cannot happen by simply bringing a bunch of countries who are pursuing their own self-interest together, because that's just a somewhat more organized way of playing out the same thing we're already playing out, which is essentially the Hobbesian law of the jungle. Um, there needs to be an international body, and the only way that comes about is by people uniting around the world to do it. So there's groups that are trying this. There are groups that are trying to put this together. I think the Progressive International right now is such a group. Now, this is of course a long way off, and there's a lot we have to pay attention to in the meantime. And there's a lot that we need to think about and do, but we cannot give up on that long range goal. Can't do it, because until we have a system of justice that truly seeks justice, that's not powered by the consent of the superpowers, whoever they may be. Today it's the United States. Tomorrow it'll be China. After that it'll be another country. I mean, people can have their opinions on what they think of the United States, what they think of China, what they think of Russia, what they think of Israel, what they think of South Africa, what they think of Malaysia, what they think of Brazil. But all of those countries are going to approach any questions, whether they are more moderate, more idealistic. Like, I think we can talk about some Latin American countries, Bolivia. We can talk about what a country like Cuba might have been had it not been constantly fighting a counterterrorism campaign. Would it have gone into the authoritarian direction that it did? Who knows? How much of that ideology and that idealism is still at the root? We can talk about all of those things, but no country is going to come in to these systems pursuing any interests other than its own on that scale. It has to be people from across the world coming together to do this. It can't be driven by Americans. It can't be driven by any one group of people. It has to be all of us coming together, and that's a big undertaking. I think there are groups that are trying to do it, but as usual, they tend to get bogged down in process, tend to get bogged down in fighting among themselves. But we have to do the best we can. I think that for now, we're very far away from this. But for now, I think the idea is to hold on to that long-term vision and do what we can on a day-to-day basis to bring it about. It's not going to come about in our generation. It's not going to come about in our grandchildren's generation, I don't think. Maybe our great-grandchildren, if we make it that long, But it is going to take a long time. There's a lot to overcome. But we can see where people vote for, and support hope. And right now, yes, New York City and Zoran Mamdani is kind of a beacon of that sort of hope. I don't think anyone in New York thinks Mamdani is going to change everything and is going to become mayor and everything's going to be fine and the city is going to be affordable, in a year. And that all of the other problems in the city are simply going to just go away. I don't think anyone believes that, but I think people do believe that Mamdani is interested in that vision and would like to lay the groundwork to make it happen. And I think people, a lot of people from a wide variety of backgrounds and political beliefs are supporting that. And I think they would support it in other places. I think what we're seeing is people having a choice between fascism, frankly, and serious, ultra nationalism in some cases. And the other option is, people like the Labour Party in the UK, the Labour Party in Canada. The Democrats are the poster children here in the United States. People who are trying to preserve a crappy status quo that doesn't work for anybody except for these politicians. That's who the Democrats are. That's who Labour is. And that is what people are being frustrated by, and they want an alternative. And I think they can get an alternative. So we're not just talking about an alternative in countries that are, right now relatively stable. Um, I think we can talk about that, and that can spread to places that are under siege, like Gaza, that can be better. You know, and yes, part of that is acknowledging everybody's rights as being equal. There's a lot of things that are all inside of this. But when we're looking at um, how do we afford rent? How do we make sure everyone is fed and clothed and has access to healthcare? We should and can look at those things because everyone on this planet can have those things. Uh, you know, we don't have to have this massive inequality of wealth around the world. Everyone can have at least what they need to live on, and we can maybe individually go from there. That can happen. But part of it, and we often overlook it, is also a global system. It is a system where everyone gets that, and a system that comes at it at these questions from a place of global justice, not of political interest. It's not okay that an arrest warrant can be issued for Benjamin Netanyahu, and not only the United States can give him a royal welcome, as Trump might think about it, but he can fly over Greece and Italy and France to get to the United States, and they don't do anything about it, though they are obligated by treaty to arrest him if he enters their airspace. We need a system where that can't happen. We need a system where war criminals are war criminals wherever they come from, and whatever the more powerful or wealthy countries think about it. So that's a vision we need to hold on to, because it's a vision that the more down to earth, the more individual aspects can't happen without. So I'll leave it there. That's my thought for this week. And again, please like and subscribe and share this video if you found it of value. And if you can support the work of Cutting Through, it's deeply appreciated. It's mitchellplutnik.substack.com. You can become a paid supporter, a paid member, and you can also donate there to help this work. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.